Hello everyone. My name is Georgi, part of Digiburn, and today with me I have Sophie Yotova as our next guest. Hi Sophie.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm learning to be sustainably good in a different way than what I'm used to.
Okay. That's a strong intro. I'll come back to that. So, to make it easier on the audience, why don't you introduce yourself, who you are?
Another interesting question, because if you had asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have introduced myself as a successful corporate employee, ambitious, professional in my late 20s who is making it, who is getting promoted, who is succeeding according to the outside perspective. And then if you had asked me the same question 3 years ago, I would have said that I am a social entrepreneur who had quit a corporate job after burning out and had committed to doing something meaningful for people around the globe. And then after the pandemic, when all plans so many of us had changed completely, I am in my early 30s and I am restarting my life after receiving a diagnosis with mental illness and realizing that having plans and being ambitious and building a career and pursuing goals is all great unless you are busy winning other people's battles. Because if you are, you end up becoming somebody your environment conditioned you to be, maybe your society around expected you to be, but not necessarily who you are supposed to be and who you can be in the long run. So tonight, today, this year, this month, right now, I have no idea who I am with all of the expertise and education and background that I've had, that I've built, that I've worked toward. I am starting from scratch.
Oh wow. Okay, well, kudos for the courage anyway. This sounds like a tough mission.
It is not exactly a choice. It's actually circumstantial, and very often in life it happens so that circumstances push us in the direction we're supposed to go, but don't always want to head there. So I'm trying to have a positive outlook, and I'm trying to focus on the fact that all of us have the power to resculpt our identity, redesign our reality, and rewrite our story if we reach a point where we can't keep living the way we have done it for a certain period of time. And again, in the beginning of my 30s, I have reached the point where I finally know what life I want to build. And it is focused on harmony, inner harmony, self-care, good mental health hygiene, and just truly meaningful, unconditional self-love. And that's not really a response that I would have given even a couple of years ago.
Wow. Thank you. That will be definitely very interesting for all our audience. And thank you for actually accepting our invite, especially in a tough moment. Just for the record and for the audience, Sophie was actually one of the first people whom we reached out to have a talk already over 2 years ago. Just around the time where we published the first episode, and ever since we've been somehow chasing each other, and we never really made it, for obvious reasons. But I'm very grateful to have you here because I've heard you. I know bits of your story today. I hope I find out even more, and I'm sure that so many other people can relate on multiple levels. You having been through all these stages, including the corporate life, the startup life, the hustler life,
The rat race and all that.
the rat race, exactly. So all of these topics seem extremely timely, to me anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm eager to find out more. So feel free to start wherever you think it would make most sense. It's a complex story, so you're the storyteller.
I am a storyteller, and the thing is, I actually feel obviously anxious because talking about difficult subjects in an open and vulnerable way is always difficult, but it's especially difficult when we struggle with our sense of identity, which is the case for many people. And honestly, I feel comfortable starting by saying that my story is not special in any way. I'm not special in any way. I am one of millions. I am a millennial. Like I mentioned, I'm in my early 30s, and I grew up in an environment where we learned to have certain values, certain aspirations based on social culture and peer pressure, and basically the global standards that were surrounding all of us. I was born and raised in Bulgaria, graduated from an American university here, but I always had aspirations to be successful, whatever that meant, because success is a very elusive and very complicated concept, because it cannot and should not be defined in general terms, just because we all have our own unique experiences of success and what it means to be successful in different contexts. And a decade ago, when I had just graduated from university with a double degree, with honors, with all of these wonderful things that people around me praised, I was eager to have a successful corporate career. I wanted to climb ladders. I wanted to accomplish things. I wanted to be a lecturer. I wanted to be, a crucial figure in a global organization. I wanted to do all these things because I had all of these, like a bright palette of skills, experiences, talents, curiosities, and all that. I wanted to put that together toward a meaningful cause. And I believe that building a good career was that cause. I could not have been more wrong. Because I got the success that I wanted. I was able to gradually, sustainably build a successful career, to get the job at a global virtualization giant. I became the youngest senior technical writer in that organization. I was building a side gig. As I was working full time, I actually, because I have struggled with an eating disorder for a very long time, I had built this food blog that unexpectedly transformed into this social enterprise that then got me on a TEDx stage, on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. Basically, I was checking so many different boxes, one after the other, and I received recognition, acceptance, validation, celebration of all of my success. Until in 2017, things kind of started not exactly going according to plan. And I experienced the first, I would call it psychological event or physical event, or I'm not even sure exactly how to describe that experience that we all call burnout. And that was the first time I started thinking that maybe making it big, whatever that means, is not always as straightforward as it seems, and definitely not always as fulfilling, meaningful and satisfying as people around may think.
Okay, thank you for being so open. I'm already trembling. So tell us a bit more about your burnout stage. What was it? When did it come? Was there a moment of awakening?
Yeah, thank you for these questions, because when people discuss burnout, there are so many different angles from which you can actually approach that and kind of relate to the subject. And
so what's your read on the story? What is a burnout? Sorry for interruption,
no,
but this is
the perfect place to actually establish what that is. For me personally, as somebody who has experienced different forms and different formats of burnout, I would say that the experience of burnout to me is a complete lack of physical, emotional, or psychological resources to be able to go about your life as you're used to doing that. That could be inability to carry out like simple, trivial, everyday tasks. It can be inability to deal with your job responsibility, something that you've done for years before that, and you were you had no problem being productive at a certain level without forcing yourself, and then certain changes take place. In my case, it was mentally and psychologically that made me doing my job completely impossible. And so from somebody who had become the youngest senior technical writer, my corporate career ended with me choosing to stop working after I had actually submitted my letter of resignation, just because the exhaustion and the physical symptoms that I was experiencing were so unbearable and so dangerous that I was willing to sacrifice all of that success. I was willing to become the person who is not performing, who is disappointing people and all that. I was willing to become this person because I was generally, I was scared for my life. And that sounds like such an exaggeration. And unfortunately, in my case, it was not completely out of the question. I mean, the fact that I may have done more damage to myself than it was healthy, because later on, several years later, after that first burnout, I was diagnosed with mental illness. And even though this is something that doesn't necessarily relate to the state of burnout, because anyone can experience burnout, the fact that I didn't have the skills to take care of my mental health in a sustainable and proactive manner certainly contributed to my burnout, because I didn't know when enough was enough. I didn't know when I should stop pushing. I didn't know that working harder than everyone around me may have unwanted consequences. And none of us are prepared for something like that to happen, because you don't know where your limits are until you reach them.
So was there a moment of awareness?
The moment of awareness was in the middle of a panel discussion around my 29th birthday that I was facilitating with speakers from a bunch of countries. And starting around the middle of that panel discussion, I was so brutally exhausted I could literally not see. Like I was seeing black in front of my eyes. It was ridiculous. Oh, wow. I had 3 glasses of wine at lunch at this particular on this particular day, because I was so exhausted, so mentally and psychologically exhausted, and I had pushed myself for so hard, not saying how difficult it had become, that it was too late for me to actually do any reasonable damage control, and I had to just power through. And that's not a great experience for somebody who is not prepared for something like that to happen. And nobody ever is, really.
Okay, so what's next? What followed?
What followed was actually right after that accident, I took, I think it was a 3-week unpaid holiday, and I did the thing that we all do when we think we need a break. I traveled. I changed the environment. I tried to forget about work and all that. And then when I went back, I realized that 3 weeks are definitely not enough for somebody to recover after such brutal exhaustion. And I was ashamed to admit that I could no longer perform mundane, simple tasks that basically were something I had done for years before that. I felt so embarrassed, so completely unprepared to deal with this, that I thought that forcing myself a little bit harder would be enough for me to catch up with the work and get back to normal, but it wasn't enough. And then several months later, I realized I can no longer live like that, because I started recognizing symptoms and just patterns of behavior and even thought patterns, if you will, that indicated things are not great. And because I have genetic predisposition to mental illness, and my aunt was schizophrenic, I actually started getting very worried that my levels of stress and my incessant, hustling and grinding and all that would trigger something that would be very difficult to come back from, which they did. And so several months later, I tried something different. I tried to become an entrepreneur officially and transform something that had been just a side gig into a social enterprise. And that was a whole other type of experience and stress, obviously. And so in the last 5 years, even though that first burnout happened in 2017, I didn't learn until last summer, actually, that disciplined self-care is not optional. It's not a luxury. It's not an indulgence. It is a must. It is a responsibility to every single one of us, because all of us have different resources that we can delegate and allocate. And unless you actually train yourself to fill your cup and learn how to recover after every push, you're bound to not only burn out, but suffer God knows what consequences.
Got it. And you mentioned on a couple of times that was your first burnout. Presumably there was a second one?
So last year, it was actually a year ago, I fainted in my kitchen in Eindhoven. I had actually relocated to the Netherlands several months earlier in an attempt to restart my practice, because the pandemic killed my social enterprise. The one that I started building right after I finished, with the corporate gig. Took me about 2 years to get it off the ground. And the moment things started to work out was the beginning of 2020. And then 2 months later, it was just back to square one. So fast forward to the fall of 2020, I relocated to the Netherlands to start from scratch and rebuild my business there, because I had the environment there that was ready for that type of value that I was offering at the time. And unfortunately, when you make a move like that during a pandemic, with all the complications that come with an event like that, and you don't have the support system and all the resources to get you going, a burnout is almost inevitable. And that happened last spring. And because I wasn't able to address different needs that I had in terms of how I was taking care of myself, I had to prioritize, work, and I had to prioritize just 100% dedication towards some sort of professional success, again, just because I didn't have the luxury. I ended up exactly where I had been, what was it, like several years before that. And the experience this second time was even scarier because I got so, I was so beyond everything I had experienced before that I could literally hardly articulate what I was going through. Like I couldn't verbalize the chaos that was going on in my brain. I was on the verge of suicide for several months because of all the extra complications that are a part of, navigating difficult psychological states. I was just in a state of almost mental paralysis for a very long time. And it took me multiple months where I couldn't work, I couldn't support myself financially, I couldn't do anything, and the only thing I could do was drag myself to therapy. It took me many months to actually start recovering some of my executive functions and simple things like being able to read a book, something you take for granted. What does it mean you can't read a book? I didn't know. And you don't know until you end up in a state that scares the crap out of you. So now, hopefully, I have learned this lesson, even though it took me several times to get back to it. But now, I finally know that prioritizing self-care is what we all need to do in order to play the long game. Whether that's building a successful corporate career, building a business, being a dedicated parent, we all need to know how to take care of ourselves before we can commit to anything in a sustainable way.
And in mind that you had you had first and second episode, were there any similarities? Or how would you be able to actually compare them?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The similarities were in the let me think. Both times I felt like I couldn't complete mundane, trivial, everyday tasks. Something that would look like just a no-brainer to anyone else in a situation like that, to me felt completely impossible. And that was a very scary feeling. But I would say each experience of burnout is unique based on where the person is in their life at that moment. So for me, both of them were very scary, and both of them felt equally hopeless, which makes such experiences very difficult to navigate because there's not exactly one size fits all approach when it comes to recovering from something like that. Of course, there are steps that we can all kind of use as guidance, types of care, but how long it's gonna take to recover, how difficult it's gonna be, in what ways you're gonna start seeing symptoms of recovery, every time it's different and for every person.
And do you think you had recovered from the first one?
Not really. Even though there had been there was a break of several years in between the two episodes, I actually never took enough time to stop trying to get back to normal and actually give myself the space to heal properly and recover properly and actually build the skills to avoid subsequent events. So, no, I didn't really recover the first time around.
And at some point of our conversation, you mentioned indicators. So, what are yours? How do you know whether things are going bad?
Unfortunately for me, the moment I start paying attention is probably when it's too late. Because the first time what I started noticing was the fact that my sleep was suffering. I would either wake up in the middle of the night or wake up extremely exhausted in the morning. So sleep suffers. I started experiencing panic attacks. I was losing my hair, my gums were bleeding, my body started getting covered with spontaneous bruises just out of nowhere. It was these very bizarre physical symptoms that attracted my attention and showed me that something is not right somewhere. And the second time around, it seemed like it came out of nowhere, but now that I go back to it, I think I had become excellent at masking the symptoms and distracting myself and actually focusing on productive self-care activities such as exercise, and I wasn't paying attention on other things that were important. And so it's so funny how we spend all of that time and energy to acquire skills and build a body of knowledge, but we don't really take the time to learn how to take care of ourselves, of our own machine. We just don't have the awareness. It's not a priority in our society. It's not, we're not told it's important to do. We're not, you don't have performance evaluation on how you take care of yourself, and it's not supposed to matter, right? Well, not really. And we only find that out when we can no longer perform, we can no longer satisfy our boss's requirements or our partners or whatever. So it's an interesting journey learning how to take care of yourself.
And how do you take care of yourself nowadays?
So right now, top priority for me is mental health self-care. This is by far the most important habit that I've developed, to work with a mental health professional of different kind, depending on my current needs. But I think one of the most important tasks that we as a society have is to start normalizing.
Listening to you, obviously have plenty of aspects to share, and thank you for being here. As already mentioned, you've been, if not the first, then the second person we've reached out to, and very happy to have you, and finally to allow people to hear a little bit more and hopefully to take action and take some valuable tips and tricks, or at least ideas, and be inspired and empowered. So along this line, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned on a couple of times that proactive self-care, mental self-care and so on, or also working with a specialist. But let's maybe bring it to the practical aspect of things. If somebody is watching right now, is there anything that one person could do right after the episode, or maybe already tomorrow morning upon waking up? What are the really small, easy, actionable steps, if there are such in your opinion, that a person could do to prevent burning out or to improve the overall well-being?
It's a great question, because when it comes to experiencing such challenges, it's good to have a go-to strategy. Unfortunately, I'm not sure there is a general approach that can work for everyone at all times. But what I can say for sure is that it's all about having the self-discipline to pay attention to things that need our attention as soon as they need our attention. For some of us, it could be certain specific challenge at work. It could be something in our personal health. It could be any sort of thing that if you feel or see something that needs to change, don't wait until it gets too late. Most certainly the change is not going to be comfortable or easy, but the earlier you pay attention to what needs to be taken care of, the healthier navigating something like that can be. Because if we are able to be as diligent about not checking email at 6 in the morning or at 11 p.m. as we are about just finishing our tasks, doing everything at work that's expected of us, maybe it would be easier to start distinguishing between our work life and leisure time. And this can make a difference, because if we are able to have a safe space where we can recover mentally, emotionally, physically, and all that, going back to work refreshed, rejuvenated, recharged definitely helps and prevents consequences that at the end of the day, hurt both the employee, the employer, the partners, and all that. So just pay attention to what needs your attention as soon as it does.
Oh, that's so nicely formulated. Well, I'm trying to be the voice of that person watching us right now and saying, well, but I don't have time. Yeah. Where am I supposed to do all of that?
Yeah, I was that person. And if you don't have time, you don't have priorities. So unfortunately, oftentimes there are demands on our time that we cannot control, obviously. But whatever depends on us can be optimized, and depending on what we decide gets the greatest return on investment, that's the area that we need to focus our attention. All of these pieces of advice are silly and annoying to people if they're struggling and if they desperately need solution right now. Like, I was there and I was extremely annoyed by all the smart pieces of advice that I had people giving me. Unfortunately, for so many of us, all of this happens the hard way. And if there's one thing that I would want people to take out of this, is that normalizing difficult experiences and creating environments where we feel comfortable discussing the challenges we're going through, this can help in an unexpected way, because by feeling a part of a larger group that is going through something difficult, there is a level of empowerment that's really crucial, because you're not afraid to show that you're not at the top of your game at all times, and that's okay. You're not afraid to communicate your current needs to your employer, because if you are valuable, they would respect that. If they don't, staying there long term is certainly unhealthy. And so we all find our own way to take care of ourselves. Unfortunately, it's often at a very high expense. So my hope is for people to just have the difficult conversations earlier. And
where do those conversations take place? Is that at workplace, at home, elsewhere?
All over the place. It should start in schools. We should start learning that it's okay to talk about difficult things in empowering ways in schools, in universities, at work, in our community centers, at home, on the dinner table, all over the place, with our friends as we're enjoying a drink in the bar. We are all humans and we all go through these brutal experiences, and it's okay, because if we build a support system, it's easy to go through them.
Understood. Thank you. And moving forward, I'm really curious to find out more. What are you up to right now, and what's your mission?
As somebody who has studied something, then made a completely different, like build a completely different career in a completely different space, then change direction again. Literally, I call myself a human octopus. I also feel like I have at least 3 hearts and 9 brains. I realized that what's important to me is to speak up, because wherever I've gone, I've met people who are struggling in similar ways, emotionally, psychologically, physically, and they are suffering in silence and perpetuating their struggles unnecessarily because they feel so alone and defective that they don't dare to speak up and to just discuss these human experiences. And so right now I am focused on just using my platform, using my voice to start difficult conversations and facilitate them in empowering ways, because all of the things that we talked about, whether it's burnout or different psychological states, conditions, diagnosis, doesn't matter. All of these things are challenges, they are circumstances, they are demands on our time and attention. But if we are able to focus on learning how to turn the unpleasant and uncomfortable feelings and experiences into something meaningful, if we have that focus, I feel like lasting change will become easier, because without the awareness to take care of this stuff, we can't start the change. And so my mission, if I have one, is to it's to show people and to learn at the same time that pain can be a source of power. And the time we live in right now is so weird in so many ways that unless we learn how to be resilient, adaptable, very quick to adjust to the circumstances, if we don't do all that, it's gonna be getting harder and harder with every following year. So right now for me, the important thing is to fight the right battles, to play by my own rules, and to use the opportunity that I have to share with people that looking successful and feeling successful, definitely not the same experience, and building the life that works for you is more important than being understood, celebrated, and appreciated by your environment. So that's the plan for me.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure and an honor. I'm happy and grateful we finally made it, and hope that the audience will find one or the other thing useful and actionable as well. And with this, I would suggest we close our session today. Everybody, if you feel like reaching out to Sophie and seeing more of her journey and how it is continuing and evolving, feel free to check out the description of the video. We will link her. And reach out anytime to her, also to us, if we can be of any help. As you know, the Burnout Triumphant series is already getting some traction. You're being our 13th guest, although plan-wise you were almost being the first or second one. But long story short, we've received a lot of feedback. A lot of people are actually finding inspiration and empowerment from these videos to recognize the worrying signs, the indicators, to decide to reconnect with oneself and go towards a more empowering and more fulfilling life according to the inner middle point of balance. So with this, I would like to close, wishing everybody with us and everybody watching later, keep on searching, find your inner balance, live by your own truth. As Sophie said, play the game by your own rules, giving yourself the needed time and space to rest, to recover, to understand your needs, and to essentially take care of both your mind and body for a better life. Thank you. Thank you for being with us.